Alright, let me tell you about a little service called Keymailer. Keymailer is a site where developers and publishers give game codes to people with audiences. So YouTubers and Twitch streamers, you can just sign up there and they start sending you stuff. Now, it's not typically big AAA stuff that they send you. It's typically indie stuff from developers with very little marketing budget who have to rely on word of mouth to get their game seen. Most of it is pretty average and some of it is downright terrible. I mean, look at this thing I got sent here. It's called The Last Hope: Trump versus Mafia, where apparently Donald Trump goes around killing mafioso. It's easily the worst thing I've ever seen in my life, and the reviews seem to agree with me.
Don't buy it, it's horrible. And I don't mean it's humorously bad, it's stupid. There are no pros. Maybe the fact that you might be able to refund is one.
Anyways, I always check on whatever I get sent through Keymailer because I really believe that these smaller devs grinding it out this way with so little marketing budget behind them, they really deserve all the help they can get. And I always hope that one day I'll discover some hidden gem and I can hopefully help cast a little bit of light on it. Well, that happened a few weeks ago when I got sent a code for a game called Tower of Time. Tower of Time is a cRPG, which is a shorthand way of saying a computer RPG. If you've ever played Baldur's Gate or Icewind Dale or Planescape Torment or Dragon Age Origins or Pillars of Eternity or Divinity Original Sin, you'll know already what this looks and feels like. In the case of Tower of Time, it's isometric perspective, it's dungeon crawling, control a party of up to 4 people in combat, level and gear them up, grind your way through over 50 hours of gameplay. That's the ball game. So, I get this key from Keymailer saying, here's a copy of the game, and I liked the blurb, so I decided I would look it up and check it out. I typed Tower of Time review into Google, expecting to see reviews from IGN or PC Gamer or whatever, and they didn't show up. Instead, what shows up is the Steam user score, which at that point was tracking at 9 out of 10, making it one of the best reviewed games on Steam released in the last few months. I go and check out the Steam review page and I see that people are raving about this thing. So my next Google search is Tower of Time Metacritic, where I'm stunned to see that not a single major outlet has taken the time to review this game. But it's tracking at a very respectable 8.1 user score at the time of writing, which is a great number for an indie title. So I think to myself, alright, there must be something to this, and I start playing this game on my laptop while I'm on vacation with my wife. Let's just say that by the end of the vacation, my wife was referring to Tower of Time as that damn game, because every moment we weren't out and about doing stuff, I was sitting in my hotel room playing Tower of Time. I had some very sleepy days during my vacation because I stayed up way too late playing that damn game, but I gotta tell you, it was totally worth it. It is a very, very solid, very enjoyable game that I firmly believe is being overlooked and underrated by a games media that is typically driven by an obsession with AAA games and the marketing dollars that come with them. In explaining the inherent value of Tower of Time, I want to take you through a very brief history of the cRPG genre, because it's in the context of that history that this game really shines and earns a very specific place in the contemporary cRPG landscape. So I was an OG Baldur's Gate fan, which was really the game that kickstarted the cRPG genre. It wasn't the first, but it was by far the best, and anyone who played Baldur's Gate back then will attest to just how incredibly life-changingly revolutionary those games were. Taking the D&D rule set and creating these brilliant, vibrant worlds and delivering these incredibly deep, beautifully written stories, all connected to a complex, functional, core gameplay loop of strategic role-based combat. It was just magnificent. And it was a bit of a heyday back then because we also had Icewind Dale and Planescape Torment at the time, and each of them were just great in their own way. But as technology evolved and as 3D became all the rage, the genre lost its luster. Neverwinter Nights was the 3D evolution of the cRPG genre, and while it was very successful, it didn't achieve the sort of cut-through and commercial success that Baldur's Gate did, because the cRPG genre was becoming something quite niche at that time. There was an untapped space for the genre to evolve in a way that would welcome new players, where Neverwinter Nights really only invited existing fans. It would fall to BioWare to once again revitalize the genre with Dragon Age Origins. Now, Dragon Age was just as brilliant as Baldur's Gate, but for very different reasons. It built its own new world, separate from the D&D legacy, and it was this fully voiced adventure with cutscenes and branching storylines where your decisions really mattered. It retained much of the depth and complexity of cRPG combat, but it streamlined it and made it work for a broader audience and for a console audience, which welcomed an entirely new generation of fans. terrific game that still really holds up today, and if you haven't played it, I recommend going back and doing so. But BioWare tasted a little bit too much of the casual Kool-Aid, and further iterations of Dragon Age would go on to hollow out the combat completely, culminating in Dragon Age Inquisition. A very pretty game with strong characters and an absurdly one-dimensional combat loop that was closer to a third-person action game than it was a proper RPG. BioWare, the studio that had in essence built the cRPG genre, had essentially abandoned it, so it would fall to others to carry the torch. Obsidian, the studio behind Fallout New Vegas and Knights of the Old Republic 2, were on the verge of financial ruin when they kickstarted Pillars of Eternity, a game that they made for around $6 million and went on to save their studio because of how wildly successful it was. And around the same time, Larian Studios would release Divinity Original Sin, which met strong critical and commercial acclaim, and its sequel would go on to become one of the highest reviewed games of 2017. But here's the thing, and we're getting close to the point now, so bear with me. As a die-hard fan of cRPGs from the old days, I struggle with Pillars and with Divinity. I want to love them, I desperately do, but I find with the limited time and energy that I have, it's hard for me to sit through all of the reading that those games require. I hate my stupid brain so much for this. I want it to be otherwise, but I played both of those games for a few hours each and I just gave up because I found myself yearning for the next combat encounter rather than yearning to click through 20 pages of explanatory dialogue. And this is where Tower of Time works for me so well, and I know many others based on the reviews that I've read. Tower of Time has a story, but it's a very bare bones affair. There's a mysterious tower that you're exploring, and its secrets may save your dying world. You'll meet new characters along the way, and your party will chat amongst itself very briefly to pepper your adventure with personality, but the focus is absolutely on the combat, on the RPG, and on the exploration. In short, Tower of Time takes the combat of Baldur's Gate and Dragon Age Origins that I loved, and delivers me a new cRPG adventure in a way that is way more accessible than what Pillars and Divinity are currently doing, even though, just to be super clear, they are both exceptional games in their own right. They're just not personally clicking for me. This is where Tower of Time has found its audience, a generation of people like myself who remember the cRPG glory days, but who haven't the time to sit down and devote 100 or 200 hours to a game. People who enjoy the tactical combat of cRPGs, but don't enjoy walking around towns for 4 hours while you chat to NPCs and collect new quests. So if that sounds like your jam, then let me break it down for you. Let's talk about how Tower of Time is structured. You'll arrive in the tower initially controlling a party of 2, but that party will grow over time to a max of 4 as you explore deeper and deeper. And there are other companions that you can sub in and out with vastly different abilities and personalities and all that sort of classic cRPG jazz. It looks and feels much more like Diablo than it does Baldur's Gate. The perspective is much tighter, and you will spend the overwhelming majority of your playthrough in one area that looks fairly similar all the way through. There are some minor variations, but it's pretty homogeneous, similar to playing something like Diablo 1, where other cRPGs typically provide a wider variety of locations. You'll move your party about these areas, collecting gold and other items, unlocking doors and chatting to NPCs until eventually you encounter a group of enemies. Much like a JRPG, when you engage them, you'll actually be teleported to a battle arena, which is specifically constructed to provide the best conditions for the battle. Enemies will spawn from different locations and in waves, and you'll have to take them down. Winning a battle earns you new items and gold that you can then use to upgrade your characters and their equipment. And that's it. That's Tower of Time. It sounds really simple, but like most things that feel simple, there's a remarkable amount of complexity that goes into it, and here it's manifest most notably in the brilliant combat system. Now, I absolutely adore combat in Tower of Time. I get so excited when I see a new pack of enemies because I love unpacking the puzzle that is each battle. And since I can slow down the combat at any time, I can do that problem solving either quickly or slowly, depending on how much thought I want to put into a given moment. Combat is very role-based, R-O-L-E. You have tanks, melee, damage dealers, archers, healers, casters, and everything in between depending on how you gear and spec your characters. You'll typically be aiming to get your front line controlling the flow of battle and the positioning of enemies, while your backline DPS are taking down enemies as fast as possible. The way you achieve each of these goals is just so flexible and so enjoyable each time. I mean, take my tank for example. He has an ability that lets him charge across the map to aggro enemies, and if it looks like enemies are about to charge his more squishy companions, he can erect a wall to block them or or reroute them. And you can actually draw the wall with your mouse, so you can even encircle an enemy if you like. And the depth of the combat goes deeper as you begin to explore the gearing and skill tree options. Looking at the same wall I just spoke about, you can spec it to either slow down enemies when they get near it, or you can make it a low wall, meaning that melee enemies have to go around it while your backline DPS can keep shooting at them. This does make your DPS susceptible to ranged attacks from enemies, but that's the bread and butter of a good RPG, meaningful choices with trade-offs. If we look at gear, that can further augment our playstyle. Perhaps you want your archer to be a lot more durable. You can add life leads to each of their gear slots, meaning that they're able to keep themselves healed at all times. Perhaps you want your caster to have infinite mana or powerful fire spells. The gearing system allows you to make all of those choices. I've spoken to the developer of the game who's informed me that there are people pushing these builds to extreme levels. People with 200 plus hours in the game have managed to achieve builds where they can solo entire playthroughs. That's a single person in your party instead of 4. That's the mark of a really interesting gearing system in a game like this. One that with enough time and practice eventually allows you to do things you wouldn't expect possible. I think as well, a lot of the combat strength comes from enemy design. There are your standard melee skeletons and orcs, but there's also ogres who'll pull you towards them, disrupting your careful positioning. There are ghouls who'll drain your life unless you break line of sight of them, or lichers who'll summon enemies into combat. There's plenty of diversity here, and all of it is combined in such a way that it leverages the specifically designed environments. Encounter design in Tower of Time is a mix of enemy design and map design, and it really does execute both of them superbly. And on top of all of this, there are even encounters that have modifiers or requirements baked into them. In ambush battles, one or more of your party members are locked in a cage, and you need to balance keeping away enemies while you apply damage to the cage to pop them open. There's a portal style encounter as well, where enemies pour through portals throughout the map, and you need to apply DPS to both the newly emerging enemies and the portal themselves. And then there's boss battles as well, and some of them require some really interesting gearing and playstyle adaptations. I used to play a lot of World of Warcraft, a game I sadly don't have time for these days. Tower of Time's combat gives me many of the strategic thrills that I used to get playing WoW. Its deep, strategic combat feels actiony without betraying its complexity. Its class structure means that you're constantly thinking in numerous dimensions at once. It's just terrific, terrific combat that I cannot recommend enough. Beyond the combat, I will freely admit that this game is nowhere near as strong. Its story is passable, but that's the trade-off that they chose to make, and I don't blame them for that. It's by no means bad, it just won't be the thing that keeps you playing and engaged throughout that playthrough. The exploration of the tower can also be a little bit frustrating. They're fairly detailed environments you're exploring with a specific color palette, and it can be really hard to see things like gold or items that you should be clicking on. I'd assume there'd be one of those buttons like in other cRPGs or ARPGs where, they highlight on the ground things that you can collect by hitting this button, but no such button exists, meaning that I spend a lot of time scanning environments for things just in case I miss them. I can see how this might have been a design choice to get me actually looking at the world rather than just looking at the things that glow in my UI, but if that's the case, I don't really think it was the right call here, and I do hope the developers add something like this in subsequent patching. I think some people might find the UI a little bit confusing at times, but I don't think this holds back the experience all that much. It'll take some time to figure out what button does what, and after that it's fine. Personally, I think the team have done a fairly good job of making things like item and skill descriptions really clear, which is often a pitfall in RPGs coming out of small indie teams, or even big budget AAA games to be honest. But these complaints, they're all fairly minor in my book. I always judge a game based on what it's trying to achieve, and there's no question here that Tower of Time achieves what it sets out to do. Provide a deep but accessible cRPG experience that hangs on really, really first-class combat. And it just nails that. Okay, so now I hope I've convinced you that this is a game worth looking at, but here's the kicker. It's only $25 US, or less than half of what you typically pay for a new release in your local currency. There's no microtransactions of any kind, meaning it's a complete experience, and I've had zero performance or bug issues during my playthrough on both my laptop and my desktop. All of this quality, from the game itself to the price tag to the performance, left me feeling so sad that this game isn't getting any play in the media. I reached out to the head of the studio, and I don't think he'd mind me saying that he was feeling a little bit down. He informed me that he quit his job to make this game happen, and the marketing of this game just hasn't hit any home runs. They don't have much marketing budget to speak of, and clearly what existed didn't really achieve the results that they were hoping for. There's 10 people working in Poland who poured their hearts into something and who made a really great game, but no one seems to know about it, and you don't get to keep making games if your last one didn't sell. My original plan for a video around this time was actually to do a God of War review, but I thought to myself, you know what difference is that going to make? Everybody already knows that it's good, it's already sold 1 billion copies, so I'm making this video today because I want people to know that this is a really good game. I'm making it because I believe that it's a good game, and I'm also doing it because I want to help this team out. This is a game that is too good to die on the vine. If a studio goes down, it should never be because their good video game was ignored by the games press. For you watching, if this game interests you at all, then try it out for 2 hours on Steam. If you don't like it, refund it. If you happen to like it, help get the word out. Share this video on Twitter, on Facebook, tell your friends, hassle your favorite YouTubers or Twitch streamers and tell them to take a look. In an era when the marketing budget determines whether games live or die, we as consumers have to aggressively employ the power of word of mouth when something great puts all of its money into the things that made it great, rather than blowing that money on marketing junk and sponsored influencer campaigns. Tower of Time is out now on Steam. I really strongly recommend you check it out.